I'm Kenar Bannister. I played Amir Holt, a monk of the Sun Soul Monastery. He likes to keep secrets, but he also is very empathetic and can shoot sun rays out of his hand.
With one hand, like you did before, this time you take your sword, turn him around to face you. He's looking up at you with a warm smile on his face, which is, oddly enough, the first time you've seen him give any sort of happy emotion.
Hi, I'm Cameron Gallagher. My character's name is Ingrid Fireforge, and I'm a dwarf barbarian, and she can rage and cares about her friends very deeply.
I get really angry sometimes, like really angry.
Alright then.
You don't want to see me when I'm angry.
I'm Kevin Wright. I played Harold F. Enric. He is a rogue who cares more about his friends than anything other than money. And I love these two. I might not pack the biggest punch, but I have skills.
Okay then.
And then I pull out my short sword and I can slash the air.
My name is Steve Park. I was the dungeon master for this experience. I led the 3 players through their situations. I voiced and played all of the non-playable characters, and I wrote and played out pretty much all the scenarios to walk the players through basically the situations at hand and what was at stake and what was to gain. When Kenar approached me for the Zombies project and asked me to help him write up a little scenario in which to showcase how zombies were utilized in Dungeons & Dragons, I knew that it was incredibly special because Dungeons & Dragons uses a different interpretation of zombie, as it doesn't subscribe to the whole chomping and infecting other people type of zombies, more so zombies in the more traditional voodoo sense of a necromancer or a wizard of some sort will raise a dead corpse into being a mindless servant to do basic tasks and be an entity for serving. So knowing that about Dungeons & Dragons and the variety of different undead sort of creatures that were out there, I knew that when I came across the Revenant sort of creature that it would be an interesting idea to explore the concept of an undead, zombified type person who was sentient and had a goal and had some form of simple task that they must get done at any cost. To pit that force against a more traditional, in the Dungeons & Dragons sense, necromancer who raised dead to carry out their bidding. Baking in some of the more interesting, fun character concepts of, of the emotions and the family ties and the history between all of that. It was a fun experience for me to watch that unfold as the different players interacted with those elements and really emotionally were affected. But for me, what I wanted to create was just a showcase of the different types of zombies that exist in the Dungeons & Dragons landscape, and how, in the traditional sense, zombies typically are the fearful monster in whatever they are in. They are the creature that is running and attacking you that you must be mindful of. But in this scenario, I felt that, especially with how Dungeons & Dragons works, it's that the zombies were a tool to carry out a necromancer's sort of wishes, and I thought that was an interesting spin that could have been really nice for Kenar's Zombies project.
So the campaign started out, us 3 adventurers answering a distress call in a village called the Umbra Hills. We weren't exactly sure what we were walking into, but it turned out to be a lot more than we had expected going into it.
You notice in the corner, one person, hood over his head, leaned over a counter, cup in hand, slowly just sort of moving his drink around. As he takes off his hood, you can't help but notice that this is, in fact, an undead person talking to you.
Mm-hmm. Turns out an undead named Elazar wanted us 3 adventurers to guide him to a necromancer that had killed him and made him not dead anymore.
So here are the nature
of my request. As soon as I find that person which must be eliminated, I must kill them. And I would hope that you would all not impede me. Regardless, there are many things that we have to face before we get there, primarily of which is the fact that the person who has turned me into this undead, vile existence has a large group of zombies and other undead at his side.
So Elazar was formerly a cleric. Clerics are known to be healers, but can also fight on their own as well. One of the features is that they're bound to a certain god in the D&D universe, and his was Mishkal, the god of healing, or goddess of healing.
Getting to learn the history of all the characters, like the NPCs in the village, made the story like way more impactful as it developed, and we figured out more about like who the bad guys were, and then also at the same time it making us question if what we were doing was right and whose motives were correct, and if they were even bad guys at all.
And it also made for just a much more satisfying ending, because we had learned so much about these characters and become so invested that in the end we actually felt real emotion for their ends.
It was definitely immersive, having like dealing with NPCs that like told a lot about like the story itself. His story connects with Caden in the sense that they together went with a bunch of adventures into the forest surrounding the Umbra Hills to fight a lich who was riding a Drago lich. Things didn't go well, and eventually he died during the adventure, but was brought back as a revenant who was essentially just sort of a walking undead who was bound by a singular goal, and that was to kill the necromancer that brought him back to life, who also happened to be Caden, unfortunately. And that definitely, that plot element made us question exactly what if what we were doing was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, figuring out that Caden was the necromancer, we didn't know that going into it, and looking back, I feel like we should have asked that way sooner.
We should have,
because
way before.
we were just kind of like, there's this big baddie that we need to go kill, and then when we figured out who the big baddie was, we were like,
it definitely changed the motives of our characters at the very end. It was very
For
stressful.
real.
Going into the battle, we were unwaveringly supportive of Elazar.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
as soon as we found out exactly the nature of their relationship, it changed our entire course.
Yeah,
of
we
action.
completely ditched
We
it.
completely ditched it.
Well, we didn't want him to die, though.
We didn't want anyone to die, really. Our first encounter, we were walking through the snow plains outside of the forest of the Umbra Hills, and encountered our first zombies, which happened to be a very prevalent problem, seeing as how Caden was using necromancy uncontrollably, trying to prevent Elazar to kill him. And these zombies weren't exactly similar to ones that we've seen, in the terms that like they don't turn other people into zombies, rather they're just raised undead, and that's it. A lot of the zombies that we see in class usually are eating people, and usually as soon as they get bitten or something, they get sick immediately, and then they also turn into a zombie. But the D&D doesn't really work like that. Yeah, they're just not really. They have one goal and they serve a master, and they're similar in that sense. When you think about like the Haitian voodoo zombies that zombies usually originate from, they usually serve one master. They sort of function in that sense, but they don't necessarily turn other people into zombies. I didn't know exactly what to expect, because we had bought magic items so we can traverse the snow and stuff, but then you told us there were pits, and that was definitely a little frightening, because we didn't know exactly what to expect from those pits, and also because Elazar didn't have anything to walk through the snow, so we were like, okay, we have to guide him.
Which became a recurring theme
which definitely became it became a recurring
aspects
thing.
of the adventure.
Yeah, it
Oh,
added another layer to that encounter and that fight because on top of trying to fight enemies, we were also trying to not fall into holes in the ground
Yes.
Yes.
and get trapped in the battlefield.
And then detecting those pits was another challenge in itself, because mainly detecting pits was based on a dice roll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you
Like
rolled
most
low,
things in D&D.
like most things in D&D, if you rolled low, you probably didn't notice anything, so you couldn't really help out. Unfortunately, I got the short end of the stick for most of the campaign in terms of rolling low, so I didn't do much in terms of detecting pits. But I did hit some zombies pretty hard
Yes.
on multiple occasions in this portion of the campaign.
It was epic.
It was amazing.
I kicked 2 heads off. I'm very proud. Just saying. I don't know.
So as we were traversing, we very quickly realized that we couldn't just kill all the zombies because they would continue to appear. So and they were hiding in the pits. For the first half of the fight, we kind of just fought head on because it was our first fight. We wanted to mess up some zombies.
Yeah.
But then very quickly it became apparent we need to get out, which
That was also a common theme.
it was a common theme. We were running a lot.
Oh man. Yeah, we were running.
Yeah.
We were
That
running
fight
a lot.
ended with us running away from like 8 zombies and more were coming up.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. So it was definitely a doozy.
Yeah.
It was a doozy.
Fight or flight, we chose flight.
Ooh, yeah. So we essentially had to carry Elazar past the fields and then get out.
Parts like this is why I love D&D so much. Okay.
Aw.
When your DM makes such an immersive universe and makes characters that mean or can evoke so much emotion from the players, it makes the experience so much better. So the cave scene in particular, when we came out of Gunther's Point, Elazar, luckily happened to retrieve a lot of magical items, and basically just improved our damage output just on its own. But it also retrieved a magical item that could read thoughts, which is very cool.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we had the conversation with Elazar about what exactly we were heading into for the Necromancer, and just if he gave us more information. He didn't give us enough. So I used the time to read his mind, and a lot of the backstory for his character came to light, and how he necessarily didn't have a reward for us because he didn't expect us to actually survive the last fight.
And going into that last final fight, knowing full well that the guy who was leading us there did not expect any of us to live and that there was possibly no reward waiting for us was, I don't know about you guys, but for me it was very mentally challenging because that
was
goes
definitely
against
challenging.
your self-preservation
Yeah.
instinct, and it makes you wonder if what you're doing is the right thing.
When we got to the location, Dread End's Gorge, of where we found Caden, we again didn't know what to expect at all. Seeing as how we didn't exactly know, we don't know Caden as characters. We just hear of him through stories of the other NPCs, and to know that he was just such a young boy when he supposedly died the first time, seeing him as a 21-year-old and being bonded to some sort of artifact that was essentially controlling him. I remember the detail, it was ingrained in his arm.
Yeah, it was when they fought the original Lich, he had a necromancer scroll or tome, and apparently he, after the fight, when Elazar died, used that book and those necromancy spells to bring Elazar back as the Revenant,
Yeah.
and
It didn't go well.
Yeah.
It didn't go as planned.
the whole 5 years between that happening and when we got there, Elazar had been trying to get back at Caden and kill him for what he did to him. The way that this last part started was Elazar trying to kill Caden anyway, even when he'd been separated from the tome, which my character just then had to kind of
Parry.
fight off his attacks,
Yeah.
which wasn't very hard. His heart wasn't in it, and you could tell because the only way that he could pass on as a Revenant was to get revenge on the person that did that to him, which was Caden. But when Caden wasn't attached to it anymore. He was just like trying to do this to like protect himself, and he didn't realize the consequences of his actions. So it was a very tough situation.
Stop getting in my way. And he swings one last time.
Yeah, the kid was young.
It's an 18. Oh my
He
god.
rolled a 7.
Why did you roll better than me?
As
I
he
have
swings
advantage.
one last time, you deflect it again with ease. It seems to be he is having a hard time actually trying to hit him. At this point, he looks towards you and he says, "So then what about everything else?
About
Do I just stay this way? I can't move on until he's dead."
I knew for a fact the holy symbol was going to play a role, because we did talk about it. We encountered it in the cave when he saw that I had a certain half of the holy symbol. It turned out that he also had another parallel half of just one holy symbol that him and his sister used to carry around to separated. I think it was in an infinity. It was in a blue infinity sign, and they connected together to make one holy symbol. So I remember in the third, when we finally cut off Caden's arm, I knew for a fact that we had to put Elazar's character to rest. So the only possible way that we could without him killing Caden was to somehow have his god answer his call in some way, shape, or form. So my character used the half of the holy symbol that I had to call on Mishkal and sort of kind of pray on Elazar's behalf to, put him to rest. And fortunately, I did, or our characters did, but it required killing him in the process.
Yeah.
But it was somewhat healing for the entire situation, because at that point, I connected the both halves of the holy symbol together, and it created some sort of magical effect that allowed Elazar to be able to respond to Mishkal, or Mishkal to respond to Elazar for the first time that we've seen in the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of, I remember, you didn't say he was warm per se, but you felt a warmth, like a magical warmth emanating from his body, which is very different because he felt cold
And dead.
and dead for the entire campaign. So you knew at that moment like there was something like healing about the whole situation, and Elazar as an NPC also felt at peace, seeing as how he was finally able to feel like alive again.
It was more of a release than just a death.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the only way he could have gotten that release, was being killed. So.
Yeah. And then Caden, I mean, he survived.
Yeah. We cut off his arm.
We cut off his arm,
Yeah.
but he survived. I know for a fact that it was definitely a struggle to get back to the Umbra Hills. I remember there was a time skip where it was like a 5-month difference. We brought him back. Owen, seeing as how he thought his son was dead, really, was very emotional about the entire scene as an NPC.
Mm-hmm.
And then presenting the information that Elazar was put to rest, not in a fashion that was necessarily in Tessa's mind of how she would have done it. We gave him a proper burial in our own sense, but she definitely wanted to bring his body back, which we thought was morally correct.
Yeah.
I would say so.
Back to Umbra Hills. That's where he
yes.
wanted to be.
Back to Umbra Hills, yeah. The ending was just very emotional for all of us. We didn't come into this expecting to be so invested in the story and or our characters and the NPCs themselves, but being so like immersed in the story and just like the world that was built was very fun to like play in, and it was just a good ending to have.
Yeah.
We had a
It offered some
wonderful DM.
closure for like the whole thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was a good ending too, because it was the type of ending where we like went into her house and Tessa's house, and she was like, "I bet you guys have a great story to tell."
Yeah.
Aw. And we did.
We did.
We did have a good story
It
to
was-
tell. A sad story, but a good story.
We had a good one.
You don't know if this is a call for help from a being that will not respond, but you notice that the blade is considerably lighter in your hand. As you tread forward, you take your blade and you plunge it into the back of Elazar. As it goes through, it pierces through his body until it comes to a full stop into his chest plate, and then it breaks through. You manage to hit him. I want you to roll damage.
This is some.
This is super sad. Well, am I doing the right thing?
What did you do?
Did D6 plus 7?
Yeah.
12.
12. As you deal
Plus 3 because it's a short sword.
15.
It's the magic short sword.
Yeah, no, I already added plus
Oh.
Yeah, it's a
4.
plus
Oh,
4
okay,
plus
no, no,
3.
no, no,
Plus 7.
It's 12.
As you plunge that blade into his body, you can feel the air in his lungs that was still trapped in there. And then he turns to look towards you, and he says, "What are you doing?" As that happens, you notice that the holy symbol around his neck is glowing.
Do it again!
Do it again? I do have an extra attack. You want me to stab him twice?
Or you could put your holy symbol into his.
Is mine glowing? Is mine glowing? The one I have glowing?
You look down, it too is also glowing.
Oh no.
Connect them!
Okay, since he's stunned, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna try and put them together.
As you leave the blade in him, as you remove the necklace around your neck and you put it on his, do you put them together in the cast that they were originally made to be? As you reach around his body and do that for him, there's a sort of pulsating light that comes from the holy symbol. As that happens, there's a soft white light that starts to envelop him, and he kind of stops and he sinks to the ground. First on one knee, then on another. He seems to be entranced by something. He looks towards the ground for almost a full 3 minutes. It's silent, it's eerie, it's ominous, but he seems to be just in a state of, strangely enough, prayer. At the end of it all, the light fades from his holy symbol and he looks towards you again. And you can see his body has stopped mending itself. And he looks towards you and he says, "Finish the rest."
As in kill? Oh
Yeah.
He looks
no!
He looks towards you.
Are you
as
crying?
well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
He looks towards all of you and he says, "I'm sorry for what I've got you involved in, but I have a feeling that I'll be able to move on now."
As a DM, you have a lot of flexibility
Yeah.
with what you want to introduce and what to add. And I didn't DM in particular because admittedly, I'm not familiar with the actual process of doing it. So I knew for a fact that Steve would have more of a control of what exactly goes into the process. So we definitely met a couple times and talked about, the elements of necromancy and how they're used, for divination purposes and telling the future, and just like the normal background in a historical sense and how that translated into D&D. So we definitely, with the variety of undead creatures that you can encounter in D&D, the Lich was definitely, or a presence of a Lich in particular was definitely on the board. But then we realized that a lot of the Liches as a creature in the world of D&D may be a little too strong, in particular, for it to have a fun session. And that's what I really wanted the project to be. I wanted it to be something fun that not only involved me, but also involved, Steve and Cameron and Kevin, and just, still be like a project that can still hold some relevance to the topic, but also have something to do as a group and still be fun.
Yeah, I mean, when I originally drew up a plan for how this whole thing was going to work out, I initially thought of just a sort of, they have to escape from point A and go to point B and try not to get killed along the way sort of deal.
Sounds
with
like
a
a Left 4 Dead.
yeah, like a showcase of different types of undead and zombies, and how like certain ones were stronger because they were zombified ogres, and others were more limber because they were zombified little gnomes or things like that. Regardless, that was my first idea, to which Kenar approached me and was like, D&D has a lot of magical components, and the zombies within it, they exist to have to serve a purpose and things like that. So after he approached me with that idea and like the whole idea of powerful necromancers in this fantasy landscape, I really took inspiration from that and drew out pretty much all the other elements that would be interesting, pitting one undead force against another, the sort of magic that was at play, whether religion came in or not, whether or not that affected the outcomes, how undead that were sentient or non-sentient, they moved on, or what was a force that was driving them. Because for Elazar, he was entirely driven by a magical energy that demanded that he get his revenge until he was released by his god. Whereas for the other zombies, it was simply the act of destroying the source of what brought them into their undeath. So that, I don't know, it was a lot of fun to just see that develop and then play out in front of me in a genuinely fun way.
I also think it was fun that I wasn't, like, we collaborated for sure.
Oh yeah.
But I wasn't fully involved with all the elements of the story. I wanted some of it, since I knew I was going to be a player, I wanted some of it to be somewhat of a surprise for myself. And I am very grateful for that. I think the fact that I didn't know everything made it a much more exciting experience for me and for the rest of the players. So definitely, I appreciate that you
No problem.
put the effort in.
Of course. Anytime.